Good afternoon, everybody. This afternoon I'll be speaking about the Rainbow Pipeline spill that occurred in 2011. We were asked to do some wet areas mapping work for that project, and I'll be talking about some of those results today. As we got into this project, we started to wonder, can a model developed to predict the flow of water across complex landscapes be used to predict the future movement of other fluids following spill events, be they oil, be they brackish water, or whatever it may be? And from there, we started to wonder, are wet areas maps, in fact, more important to the Alberta energy sector than they are to the forestry sector? So just to refresh your memory, these are three of the different data layers that are delivered with the wet areas mapping project, which are the flow direction raster at 1 meter resolution, the flow accumulation raster, and the predicted wet areas raster. So just as an overview, this is the location of the pipeline spill that occurred about 50 kilometers upstream of Nipispi in Alberta. What we see here is a shot from north facing south of the breach. You can see this is after the cleanup has already started. You can see some vehicles along the pipeline here. This is just another view. You can see some of the contaminant booms and things like that on site. Now what we can see right here, it might be kind of difficult to see, but in the center of the screen you'll see a little red polygon. This is actually the outline of the mapped spill as it occurred on the ground. What you see in blue is the officially mapped water features provided by the government of Alberta. So at the time that the spill occurred, this is all the water that was known about and could be managed against. What you see here is the predicted stream channels that we've developed for this same area. So you can see that there's obviously a lot more water on this landscape than was previously known about. And these are the predicted depth to water values, or wet areas values, for the same area. So now we'll just zoom in a bit. So as we start to examine this map, we can see the connections between the mapped water features and the unmapped features as they may flow towards this large water body. What we have here is a compare and contrast slide that shows the officially mapped water features on the left side and the predicted depth of water, or wet areas values, on the right side. So we can say, having this wet areas mapping information, we have a lot more information, a lot higher resolution information to help start to make decisions in terms of where to plan the spill containment as the breach may flow towards this open water feature at the south. One of the great values of having this information is, before any boots go on the ground on site, ACERT in Calgary is able to have this map in their hands to start to define their mitigation strategies before folks even have to get there. So this is the actual location of the breach along the pipeline. Now you might imagine that the contaminant is going to flow down the pipeline and through this open wetland in the south. Now, having the wet areas mapping information, we start to get a lot more detail in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. What you see again is the shades of blue, more wet to less wet, dark blue to light blue. It might be difficult to see, but we also have the hydrological gradients emanating from these wet areas. So we can start to see a lot more information in terms of the hydrological flux across the landscape. Now, as we look at this map a little further, we can start to identify some flow bridges. Although there may not be actual channelized flow between these locations, they are wet spots and seepage can occur, whether it be of water or of brackish water or of oil. We can also start to see that through these flow bridges, when a contaminant reaches another channel, that it may start to take alternate locations. So we might not only have to manage against the channel in which the flow has occurred, but there may potentially also be other channels that may become affected. So mitigation strategies have to be developed for all these potential locations. We can also start to get an idea of the hydraulic head above each of these channels. So we can see how much water is flowing through that channel, and in essence start to get an idea of the speed or velocity at which this contaminant might flow through these channels. So having all this information is very valuable and very useful, and it can be had before you even have to go out to the field. So what you see now, this is the actual GPS location of the spill and the outline of the spill. So we can see that there's fairly good correlation in terms of what we would have predicted from the wet areas maps and all these other analyses of the maps relative to what actually occurred on the ground. We've started to develop a linkage with the ACERT team in Calgary in terms of rapid development and deployment of these maps when a spill occurs. So right now we'll just walk through a little bit of a flow chart in terms of how the processes occur when a breach does happen. So initially when the breach occurs, a wet areas mapping request is sent to UNB. A dedicated server here at UNB analyzes the request, and if the area has not yet been processed, the wet areas maps are generated for that area. Once the maps have been generated, they're sent back to the wet areas mapping data archive. If the data has already been processed, then it's sent back, we just go right to the archive, we assemble all the tiles that are required, and that information is directly sent back to the ACERT team in Calgary. So this is a very fast turnaround in terms of getting the data that's required when a breach does occur. Another question that we started to ask ourselves is, can wet areas mapping data mitigate the hydrological risk caused by infrastructure, be it roads or pipelines or well pads across the landscape? So what you see here, this is an ortho image in the background with roads in black, pipelines as red lines, and well pads in red blocks. You can also see all of the mapped water features that are turned on. What you see here is the bare ground LiDAR hill shade for the exact same area. So as we start to just kind of digest what's going on here, we can see that this is a very complex landscape. There's a lot of detail and a lot of potential for flow to go in different directions if we're using lower resolution information. What we see now is the predicted wet areas for this landscape. We can start to get an idea of the proximity of each of these pads to wetlands, and we can start to get an idea of how many areas or how many channels might be crossing roads, be crossing pipelines, and all those sorts of things. We can also start to look at this information and just start deciding, with all other things being equal, is there a value to placing a well pad in any particular location relative to any other spot based on its proximity to a wet areas feature. So now we'll just zoom in a little bit on one of these particular pads. You see a zoom in on the pad with an inset of an even closer zoom on the right-hand side. So as we look here, we can start to see the proximity of this pad to a wet areas feature and start to look at the risk associated with that placement. Now, going back to some of the original data layers that we had mentioned were delivered with this product, when we start to look at the flow direction grid, now this might look quite hairy, but if we just take a few minutes to digest the data, we can start to see that each of these colors represent one of the 8 cardinal directions in which flow can occur from any particular cell along the landscape. So in essence, at 1 meter resolution, we can determine for every single cell on this landscape the direction which we would expect contaminant or water to flow from that spot. So that is essentially what you see with this map. Now with this information, we're actually able to accumulate the number of cells across the landscape from the directions of flow that were previously calculated. So what you see here is this is called the flow accumulation raster. This information defines the number of cells which flow to any particular point along the landscape. So we can start to see where channels would be expected to occur as we start to go from red to white to orange down to blue. We can see that the flow accumulation is increasing. So these are locations where if there is going to be a flow, it is likely going to be in one of these locations. Now we're back to the bare earth DEM for the same area, just to show the final reference in terms of the lay of the land across this particular area. In summary, that was just a quick overview of some of the information that can be attained from wet areas mapping data from a hydrological risk and a spill mapping perspective. Again, we would like to thank our partners, Devon and Statoil, as well as ESRD and the Government of Alberta for this project. Thank you very much.